is since yesterday, and I really wanted to refer last night, Dr. Matoba was saying that he was one of the first agents that brought together the public service, academicians and practitioners. And the way I see now, all the presentations look like more of an academic rather than more of a practitioners. So when are we going to talk about the impact that these implications, the causes, the challenge would have for the clients? Nobody's talking about the clients, the service delivery. How is it going to affect the delivery of health, education, water when it comes to this crisis? And what are the measures? Like my sister just was saying, that we are talking about problems, but out of this conference, do we really look for APAM to take that responsibility to put together the solutions, or is it going to come out from the participants? What is the role of APAM in collecting these informations and putting it together to a practical aspect of it? Thank you.
I think I'll just comment on one of them around the need for solutions and how we as public service managers and administrators can help with those solutions. I think whatever problems we look at these days in the field of public administration, we find that the problems are complex, interrelated. Some of the old silos that we used in our thinking are no longer there. So thinking horizontally is really important, because there's probably no one right solution, and there's probably no one person that owns that particular solution. In terms of developing solutions as public administrators, the kind of questions that we ask in our policy development when we propose a solution is we look at what outcomes we want to achieve. We look at what others are doing, how are other jurisdictions, other countries are achieving those outcomes, how much are we willing to pay to get a certain outcome, or who pays for achieving that.
Two factors contributed to the growth of Korea. One, the idea of improving their human resources capacity. Two, the idea of improving on the resources they have. And here we can look at the Korean War and the Vietnam War, which helped to import technology in the area. Now, what I call the hidden agenda. We have had wars in Africa. I'm not saying we should have wars in other development. Congo has known no peace. Sudan has known no peace. But instead of the developed countries, in trying to improve on the development of this country, by helping these countries, for example, in agriculture, we import food to these countries instead of helping the neighboring countries to develop their agricultural factor. So that's what I was saying about the hidden agenda.
The major problem with Africans is that we who are sitting here, we are actually lazy to implement what we are supposed to be doing. And I think that is what we need to be starting actually talking. And simply say, what is that we are not doing? Than pinpointing fingers everywhere and elsewhere. And actually making sure that we know what we are supposed to be doing and do what we are supposed to do. We are actually lazy. And unless we address the issue of laziness and make sure that we came out of that quagmire, Korea, the issue of Korea, he said one very important thing, that we had no brain, we were suffering, and we had to actually understand how to get out of that suffering.
We expect less money than we have to do for national defense. I think that's good for us. But in terms of the university, they sometimes try to interfere our internal politics. But now, because in Korean economy is stronger and stronger, their influence is almost gone. But in the 1950s, because in terms of the finance, our the ratio of financial autonomy is very low. Without the aid of the U.S. government, we can survive. At that time,
given the extraordinary nature of this crisis, declining growth rates for the first time in 60 years, the compression in world trade for the first time in more than 25 years, the industrial world has reacted with extraordinary measures also. Where is monetary policy today? In the major countries, interest rates are at zero, meaning monetary policy is almost exhausted. That instrument is almost exhausted. So the so-called monetary easing, as the British call it, is the only alternative now they are using, and that has a lot of political and economic questions. The fiscal stimuli have raised the issue of sustainability and the extent of debt, the question of debt, again raising the big question. Now, then issue is, how does this position ourselves for the developing countries? Is this a relevant matter? Are we also cornered, or can we use those policy instruments? And I'll come back to this point. That's the only point I would add, that monetary policy is literally exhausted in the industrial world, and that fiscal policy is becoming problematic. This is the way they see it now in the G20 process, as you will hear, I think, later this week. On Africa, I'll only add also one observation, namely that the reduced short-term prospects for our access to the international financial markets for African countries, 8 or so more countries that position themselves to try and reduce any dependence by going to the international finance market, so that to look more increasingly as serious business propositions in Africa. This is obviously a setback in terms of our desired further direction in Africa, and I think one has to look at in that sense. I have presenting a case study of Tanzania, and I will approach it by looking at 4 areas ranging from transmission channels to mitigating the effects of this crisis. Beginning with exports which seen prices falling almost all across the export categories, with the exception of gold. And that, of course, will strain the trade account, and we shall see what should be done to handle that.
To talk about the general background to Uganda's economy, provide an analysis on Uganda, to provide policy responses, and then the mitigating factors on public administration. Now, those of you who have studied the economics of Africa know very well that Uganda has been a darling of the World Bank and the IMF.